So one thing that stood out to me in the opening readings is Lou had mentioned that we don't need any other books to learn how to recover. I don't know why that stood out to me, but it come from the forward to first edition in that first paragraph where it says that we hope these pages prove so convincing that no further authentication will be necessary. So we don't need any other books. We don't need any other books for what? Well, what did we read in the beginning? The definition of Alcoholics Anonymous is the story of how these guys recovered. So we don't need any other books to learn how they had recovered. So we don't need any other books to learn therefore, how to recover, right? Well, that didn't make sense to me for the longest time because I thought the 12 and 12 is where you're going to learn how to recover because it's the 12 steps and 12 traditions. The first part, it's the 12 steps. Don't we use the 12 steps to recover? Yes. So wouldn't it be in the 12 and 12? Would it not make sense that the directions would be in the 12 and 12? Well, interestingly, if you go back to the table of contents, I'm sorry, if you go back to the title page, which is the third page with writing inside the cover, and you back up one page, just for people who have not covered this before, right before the title page, at the top of the page, it says other books. Other books. And other means not the same, distinctively different. So these are other books that are not the same as this book. In fact, they are distinctively different than this book. And the first book that they have listed there, AA publishes a lot of books. They're in the publishing business. That's one way they make money. So the first book they have there is the 12 Steps and 12 Traditions. Now, on the title page of this book, they told us what this book is about, the story of how many thousand men and women had recovered from alcoholism. Well, they also give us a description of what that book is about, right underneath the 12 Steps and 12 Traditions. It says, that book is an interpretive commentary on the AA program by a co-founder. Now, one thing that we know is that we are going to learn clear-cut directions on how these guys have recovered. In fact, they say we're going to learn specifically how they recovered, right? Clear-cut directions. Does that sound like we're going to get opinions? Sounds like we're going to get directions, very different than opinions. And if you use the words interpretive commentary, that can also be stated as subjective opinion. Now, the subjective opinion is by a co-founder, which is Bill W., but it is selective opinion. It is not directions. Okay, so we understand that that's what that's about. In fact, if you read into that book in the beginning of 12 and 12, it tells you that it's a group of essays that were put together. No directions. And we also know, again, back and forward to first edition, it says to show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered. That's in italics. Precisely how we have recovered. That's the main purpose of this book. Do we get it? To show us how to, it's the main purpose. It was said in the beginning by Paul that a preface, he looked this word up, preface, I didn't get the whole thing, but he said that it's going to set forth the book's purpose and scope. That's what a preface is. It's going to tell us what the purpose of the book is and the scope of the book. And all we read in that second paragraph there, the purpose and the scope, said this book's the basic text. This is a textbook to learn how to recover, right? With a textbook, we learn. We study, we learn, we take action. And it goes on to say that we're going to find the description of the AA recovery program. That's the directions. The description of the AA recovery program is just in the first portion of this book, the first 196 pages. So we don't even have to look past page 164, 32 in the Roman, 164 in the Arabic, and that's it. That's the directions. So if you're new and you want to learn how to recover, now you know the purpose and scope and exactly how to do that. It's going to be in the first 196 pages of this book. That's where we're going to learn to recover. We're not going to find it in any other book. I've not found any other book that says, we're going to show you how we recover. We're going to give you directions. It doesn't even say in the 12 and 12, you would think it would, that this book is to give you directions on how to work the 12 steps. It doesn't, because it's not. Okay, is that clear? Does everybody understand it? So that's why we're studying this book. And where we are now, we just started over with the first 196 pages a couple of weeks ago, and we have made it now to the doctor's opinion on page XXB, is what I have marked. And to give us a little bit more of the scope of what we're going to be studying here, we find that the doctor's opinion, chapter 1, Bill's story, chapter 2, there is a solution, and chapter 3, more about alcoholism. All 4 of those chapters combined is to teach us about one thing. It's to teach us about what alcoholism is, so that, and it tells us this right in the first paragraph on chapter 4. It says everything prior to this, you've learned something about alcoholism, and we have made the distinction between the alcoholic and the non-alcoholic. That's all about step 1. To determine whether you're an alcoholic or not, according to Alcoholics Anonymous, you're going to need to study the doctor's opinion in the first 3 chapters so that you get all the information about what alcoholism is to determine with your experience whether you're one or not. So the first 3 numbered chapters are really all based on, we're going to see this, are all based on the doctor's opinion. It's only 7 1/4 pages, but it tells us what the medical community believes is a problem with our mind and body. This illness that we have. An illness is a condition that prevents the normal functioning of the mind and or body. They suffered from what they call a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. They suffered from this illness, right? And they recovered from that illness. So the first thing they want to tell us in the doctor's opinion, we only went through the first paragraph last week, but in short, it tells us that if you're reading this book and you think you might have a problem with alcohol, you think you might be an alcoholic, they're saying, first thing we think you might want to know is what we wanted to know. If I'm suffering from some kind of illness, who am I gonna go to about that? Am I gonna go to my pastor? Am I gonna go to my plumber? Am I gonna go to my electrician? Generally, we're gonna go want to see a doctor, right? And see what the doctor's got to say. And they're telling us here, we got something that we're going to outline here to show you how we recovered. But first, we think the first thing you're probably going to want to know is, what does the medical community have to offer before I look at what Alcoholics Anonymous has to offer? So they're saying here that the person that they want to give us their opinion on alcoholism, in their opinion, what we would need to know is 2 things. We need to know, number 1, what do they have to offer, according to a doctor? And number 2, what do they think about the plan that's outlined in this book? And they said the 2 qualifications for this guy, number 1, or gal, when they were thinking about it, they said they need to have, number 1, had experience with our sufferings. So they must have seen us as we were suffering from this illness, this hopeless state of mind. They must have seen us in our hopelessness. That's number 1. How are they going to be able to, if we don't understand the problem, how are we going to understand the solution? So we got to have somebody who understands the problem, seen us suffering. And number 2, is that they have witnessed our return to health. Didn't we just read that to become recovered is to be returned to a normal state of health? So they need to have witnessed our return to health. They had to have seen people go through this book, follow these directions, seen us return to health. Okay, so the guy that they chose to do this, it happened to be a guy, they say that his qualifications, okay, you're only picking one guy, so you want to pick somebody who's going to be pretty well qualified, right? They said that he's a well-known doctor, and he is the chief physician. That's the top guy in the organization, chief physician at a nationally prominent hospital that specialized, the top guy at this hospital that specializes in alcohol and drug addiction. That's probably a pretty good guy to use, because back then in the 1930s, there weren't too many hospitals. There were no treatment centers, but there certainly were no hospitals, not very many hospitals that specialized in alcohol and drug addiction. Right? And why would they say drug addiction? We talked about this a little bit last week. I thought we just wanted to talk about alcohol. We're going to find in this book, this what we're recovering from is addiction. We're going to be learning in this chapter about addiction. And we're going to learn how all these different addictions, they work exactly the same. Whether it's that we're reaching for alcohol to feel better or we're reaching for drugs or whatever, regardless of what I've heard over the decades, narcotics, cocaine's very different. Gambling, it's a totally different deal. Sex, we all have sex, so it's an addiction. It's very different. We're going to find it's not very different. And in fact, the solution at all those anonymous programs are exactly the same 12 steps that we're using now, except with the word alcohol, everything else is the same. So it's kind of hard to fathom how you'd have a different problem, but the same solution works. Usually if you got a solution, it's for a specific problem. So that's what we're going to find here, is that we're going to be learning about addiction. And we start out here with the doctor Yeah, interesting. As I'm reading that again, alcohol and drug addiction, it's an addiction problem, not a drinking problem. It's an addiction problem. That's the first thing we really need to get into our heads as we get to understand what addiction is. But anyhow, they asked this doctor to write a letter, okay? And this is what he says. To whom it may concern, I have specialized in the treatment of alcoholism for many years. In late 1934, remember the book was written in 39. In late 1934, I attended a patient who, though he had been a competent businessman of good earning capacity, he was also an alcoholic of a type I had come to regard as hopeless. So who this doctor's talking about is Bill Wilson, who turned out to be AA number one. So Bill came to that hospital. He learned about Bill. He learned that he was a very competent businessman at one time with good earning capacity. He used to make a lot of money. But he also came to believe that he's an alcoholic. And not just an alcoholic, he tells us what type of alcoholic. So apparently in his mind, there's different types. And he said this type is one that he has come to regard as hopeless. Now, hopeless, if you look that up in the dictionary, which is the only other book that we use, by the way, at this meeting to make sure we understand the words we're using, hopeless means without any possibility of a solution. So according to this doctor, in all the treatment methods they had, there's a certain type out there of alcoholic. Nothing we can do for you. And that's what he sat down and told Bill. Sat down, learned all about him. And just like if you would go in to get, you got some kind of illness going on, and your doctor may come back and say, you know what, I know exactly what's wrong with you. And then you're like, well, great. What is it? But more importantly, what do we do about it to get better? Right? And this is top dog here. You get to actually sit down and talk to. And he said, I know exactly what's wrong. I've seen thousands of alcoholics come and go all the time, and I know what you have, and I know the exact type you are. You are an alcoholic of a type that we deem as hopeless. In other words, there's nothing I can do for you. In other words, you're going to die this way. Nothing we have to offer. I've seen it before. Don't even want to waste your money. Nothing we can do for you. Can you imagine being told that by a doctor? And where do you go from there? He's the chief physician at this nationally prominent hospital. Well, I need a second opinion. Who the hell are you going to use a second opinion against that? Right? So that's what he's talking about. We're going to learn about this hopeless variety, because a lot of people might start thinking, well, I think I'm an alcoholic. I didn't know there were different varieties. What is the hopeless variety? What does that mean? Let's learn and see if we can understand that a little bit more. He goes on to say, in the course of his third treatment, that's interesting. They left a big blank spot there. First, he says that he came to him and he determined him to be hopeless. But he must have come back 2 more times, right? Because this is his third treatment there. Treatment, that means that they tried to do something for him. So that means the first time that he came around, they gave him, the normal course of treatment that they would for an alcoholic, just like they would for anyone else. And these people leave. Well, every once in a while, one of those guys come back. It didn't take, and they come back a little worse. Well, Bill was one of those. He come back a second time. The second time, well, this is plan B. These are the intense cases, the ones that we weren't able to fix. So they have a plan B, and they give them everything they got in plan B, and they send them back out. Well, every once in a while, one of those guys come back. And when one of those guys come back, the doctor didn't have a plan C. Once B doesn't work, you're of the type that we consider hopeless. Nothing we can do for you. So anyhow, he was in the course of his third treatment there. And it says, during his third treatment, he acquired some certain ideas concerning a possible means of recovery. Well, if he came back the third time and the doctor told him he was hopeless, how did he come across these ideas concerning a possible means of recovery? Because during his third treatment, just prior to his third treatment, rather, he had come in contact with an old drinking buddy of his, who, according to, if you read into the history of it, his name was Ebby Thatcher. And Bill always used to say, man, if I ever drink like Ebby, I know I got a problem. He never considered himself alcoholic, but if I was like him, it's a problem. And Ebby called him and he came to see him. We're going to read about this in Bill's story, so I don't want to go too much into it. But he came to him and he was sober. And Bill was just blown away because he just got told by the doctor that he's hopeless. And he thought, if I'm hopeless, what about you? you know? And so he asked him what happened. And in short, Ebby told him what he did in order to recover from this alcoholism thing. So that's where he got these ideas concerning a possible means of recovery. And to get into this a little bit more, Ebby didn't tell him about 12 steps. They didn't have 12 steps at that time. So why don't we take a look at what these ideas are concerning the possible means of recovery. If you back up to page XVI, which is in Forward to Second Edition, and you drop down 8 lines, and you go into the first sentence there, it says, from this doctor. Everybody got that? Page XVI, 8 lines down. And this is talking about the discussion between Dr. Silkworth that we're reading about and Bill Wilson, who they're going to call a broker. It says, from this doctor, the broker learned the grave nature of alcoholism. So what that means is what we just read. The doctor told the broker, you're hopeless. That's the grave nature. Grave meaning dead, right? That's what he taught him. And then he comes across Ebby, and Ebby tells him some stuff that he learned that to recover these ideas, he got from a group called the Oxford Group. And again, the Oxford Group was just different chapters throughout the country and in Europe that were trying to practice first century Christianity to the best of their ability to live a better life. They weren't alcoholics, but Ebby got some ideas from there from another guy who had recovered. And Bill heard these ideas, and it says here, he couldn't accept all the tenets of the Oxford. Everything that Ebby said, he couldn't accept all of it, okay? But he was convinced of 6 things that were needed to recover. And I would underline these if you don't have this in your book, because this is what the 12 steps were born out. In fact, this is what all the first 100 of the authors, that is what they did. The 12 steps didn't turn up until Bill actually wrote them down in chapter 5. They weren't doing 12 steps. None of them recovered from 12 steps. They recovered from these 6 things. And it says the first thing that he was convinced of was the need of moral inventory. He was convinced of the need of confession of personality defects. He was convinced of the need for restitution to those harmed. He was convinced of the need for helpfulness of others. And then he was convinced of the necessity. Necessity is the same as must. He was convinced that there must be a belief in God, and he was convinced that there must be dependence upon God. So that's 6 things. Hear anything in there saying he was convinced of the need to stop drinking? He was convinced of the need to stay sober. He was convinced to the need of going to meetings and get his group therapy 3 to 4 times a week minimum. Was he convinced of the need of getting a sponsor and calling them 90 days in a row? None of that. Actually, there's nothing about alcohol. But nonetheless, that's the 6 things that Bill had got. Going back to XXB, we'll get into more about that later. That's the idea. So keep in mind, in the course of this 3rd treatment, for Bill to recover, we're going to find here in this paragraph, there's 3 things that he had to do. And the first thing he had to do was acquire these ideas about a possible means of recovery. He had to get an idea what the solution was. So he got that. We'll read later in this chapter, it says that Bill put them into practice immediately, and he recovered immediately. So the first thing in Bill's recovery process was to learn these ideas, study, learn, take action, and he recovered. You would think that would be the only thing he did, right? I mean, I recovered now. That's only the first. It says as part of his rehabilitation, there's some continuing efforts here. It says he commenced to present his conceptions to other alcoholics. So part of this, didn't we read the 4th thing? The 4th thing that they were doing is this helpfulness to others, right? He's convinced of the need of that. Doesn't work without it. So the second piece is presenting these conceptions to others. Hey, I was just like you. I felt just like you. I lived just like you. And you know what? I don't live that way anymore, and I don't feel that way anymore. And if you've yet found a solution to get out of it, I'll show you what I did, if you're interested. That's what Bill did. And that's the way it's presented. It's not, hey, man, you got an alcohol problem. This is what you got to do. That is not how we do this. That's not how Bill did it. And it's not how any of them we're going to see had done it. So this is what we did. This is what we got. If you're interested, we'll show you what we did. So that's presenting those conceptions to other alcoholics. And then the third thing he had to do, it says, he impressed upon them, that's those who ended up, he taught and they recovered, he impressed on them that they must do likewise with still others. 2 of 3 components of this has to do with helping others. I'm going to help you, and you know what? If you recover, you must help others, or this isn't going to work. We're going to read that over and over in this book. So that's the 3 pieces. And it goes on to say, according to the doctor, it says, this has become the basis of a rapidly growing fellowship of this men and their families. Let's look at that sentence. This has become the basis. A basis, by definition in Webster's, is a fixed pattern of doing things. And fixed, by definition, means not subject to fluctuation or change. Okay? So that has become the basis, the fixed pattern of what all these guys were doing the same things. 1, 2, 3. Get the conceptions, recover, help others, insist that they must do likewise. Fixed pattern. Doesn't change. It says of this rapidly growing fellowship, which means that at this time, the doctors see this thing is growing and it's working, right? And it says, get this, of these men and their families. Their families were involved. Their families were involved in getting this recovery process, helping others, and assisting. How often do we hear about that in AA? That the families are involved. We're going to learn a whole lot about that when we get to the back part of this book. But keep in mind, those 3 things, it's the fixed pattern, not subject to change. What that means is, today, that is still the basis of the Alcoholics Anonymous program. It is not subject to change. That's exactly what we're supposed to be doing, according to the book Alcoholics Anonymous. The doctor concludes saying this man and over 100 others, according to the doctor, says they appear to have recovered. Now, that word recovered, this isn't written by the drunks now. That word is being used by the doctor. He didn't say they're cured. He didn't say they're sober. He says they've recovered. They've been returned to a normal state of health after suffering from an illness that he had no solution for. It goes on to say, I personally know scores of cases who are of that exact same type, this hopeless type, with whom other methods that they would implement, other methods had failed completely, meaning we couldn't even get them a little well. Failed completely. These facts, didn't we read, Pat, didn't you say this is based on factual accounts? Yeah. These facts appear to be of extreme medical importance because of the extraordinary possibilities of rapid growth inherent in this group. They may mark a new epoch in the annals of alcoholism. These men may well have a remedy, that would be what we saw on page XVI, the remedy, for thousands of such cases, these hopeless types. You may rely absolutely on anything that they say about themselves. Very truly yours, William D. Silkworth, MD. So they had him write this piece. But then if you remember when we were covering in forward to second edition, and we were reading about how Bill got well, and actually in XVI, we just read about it. We read about the 6 things he did, right? But I didn't mention the first sentence that we read, which was that the broker learned the grave nature, from this doctor, the broker learned the grave nature of alcoholism. We found when we were reading that was extremely important. If Bill didn't know that he was hopeless, Bill would probably continue on exactly as he had up to that point, trying every means to get over his alcoholism, trying to quit, trying to think, oh, I'll be more serious about it this time. Keep trying, because there might be a solution. Until the doctor said, there is no solution. You're going to die like this. I've seen thousands and thousands try it on their own. No good. Try to implement stuff that we have here. Still no good. You're going to die. So he had to know that he was hopeless. That's step 1. And then we found when Bill went to try to pass this on to one other person, the first person ended up being Dr. Bob, which is AA number 2. And he went and said, hey, you know what? And he sat down and talked to Bob about his drinking. We're going to read about that later as well. And what did Dr. Bob say? Man, you know about this drinking game. I was just like that, drank just like I tried quitting just like you, man. How did you get over it? And Bill said, well, I can show you what I did. I learned these things from the Oxford group. And immediately, Dr. Bob's face just went blank because he was already a member of the Oxford group. In fact, it says that he's already tried those spiritual means, those 6 things and many others to recover, and it didn't work for him. But the next sentence goes on to say that when the broker gave him the doctor's description of alcoholism and its hopelessness, then he gained a willingness he was never before been able to muster, and he recovered. That piece is critical. That piece is critical to understand that we're hopeless. We didn't read anything about that in there, about this hopeless. So the AA guy said, hey, doctor, can you tell us a little bit more about what you told us? Because remember, Bill learned the grave nature. So the words that were used and impressed upon him must have been pretty good, because you could probably learn the grave nature from many different doctors, but whether it would have had the depth and weight that they talk about in this book, I don't know. But whatever the doctor told Bill, he got it, that he was hopeless. He understood it. He related to this condition of the mind, what's wrong, and the condition of the body. And then when Bill went to Dr. Bob, and then he tried describing the hopeless nature to Dr. Bob, Bill didn't use his own experience and his own description of what it looks like. He said he gave him Dr. Silkworth's description. In other words, he told him exactly what Dr. Silkworth, because that's what worked for him. So he learned exactly what Dr. Silkworth had to say. And then he was able to recover. Why do you think they put the doctor's opinion as the first thing in here? Why did they have the doctor write this? So that we can learn exactly the exact same words, the exact same opinion from the exact same doctor, unfiltered. In fact, we read that the doctor's opinion it said that there's been no radical changes to the book, but then it goes on to say in the foreword that there's been no changes made to the doctor's opinion. They want to keep that. Do we understand the reason for that? They want to change anything, regardless of what my opinion might be. I want to change that because it works. When you got a recipe that works for something, you don't change it. My God, do we see people change it though? I think about restaurants. You get something that's fantastic. You go there every week and get. We decided to change it. Why would you change something that works? And then it doesn't taste the same, right? And you don't like it. They knew that. We got a recipe that works. Let's not change it. So they asked the doctor to write him another letter and explain this condition of the mind and body, the grave nature of alcoholism, that both those guys needed, Bill and Dr. Bob needed, in order to begin the recovery process. We're going to go over that right now so that we will have the information needed for us to be able to have a foundation to understanding alcoholism. So as a physician who at our request gave us this letter, he's been kind enough to enlarge upon his views in another statement which follows. In this statement, he confirms what we who have suffered alcoholic torture must believe, and that is that the body of the alcoholic is quite as abnormal as his mind, seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. Now, for me, probably, anybody that I've worked with, I don't want to speak for anybody else, but I'd say anybody that I've worked with coming in, what do we think? I've tried to quit and I can't. Why? Must be my willpower. Something's missed. Whatever it is, it's always something to do with the mind. It's not the body. It's not like, well, man, every time I get in front of the glass, my hand goes like this and puts it in my mouth and I don't even think about it. And I don't know why that happens. Something wrong with my hand and it's something wrong with my hand when it sees that. It's not a body issue. We never think of it that way. But they're going to tell us right off the bat, they're telling us that the mind or the body is quite as abnormal as the mind. It says it did not satisfy us to be told we could not control our drinking just because we were maladjusted to life, that we were in full flight from reality or outright mental defects, not just mental. These things were true to some extent, in fact, to a considerable extent with some of us, but we are sure that our bodies were sickened as well. In our belief, and I would underline this, in our belief, any picture of the alcoholic which leaves out that physical factor is incomplete. You know that I was going to AA for a good 15 years, from the time I was 14 to 20, whatever. And I never heard, I can't ever recall hearing, I'm an alcoholic and there's a problem with my body too. Because I'm an alcoholic, there's something wrong with my body. I never heard that before. Never heard that. What the hell's wrong with the body? Understand? But they're telling us that it's incomplete if you don't. I had incomplete information for 15 years. Interesting. The doctor's theory that we have an allergy to alcohol. Oh, that's what we're talking about with the body. He's saying that we're allergic to it. That's an interesting concept. As laymen, our opinion as to its soundness may, of course, mean little, okay, because they're not doctors, so it doesn't mean much. However, as ex-problem drinkers, we can say that his explanation makes good sense. I would underline it, meaning his explanation explains many things for which we cannot otherwise account. And here's what that is. We're going to read about this later. What's wrong with the body? He says we have an allergy. How the hell does that make any sense? How does it make good sense? And what can we not otherwise account? Well, this goes back to question number 2 we'll find in chapter 4, which is, have you ever gone out drinking and telling yourself that this time I'm only going to have 2 or 3? Not to the point I'm ready to quit yet. Not that serious about it. But you know what? I got in a lot of trouble last week. So I'm going to drink, but I'm only going to have 2, maybe 3, no more than 4. There's the line. Okay. The mental, that's the line. That's all I'm going to have. And you wound up having a lot more than that. Does that ever happen? Does that happen repeatedly? Does that happen where it's almost like routine? Why is that? Did I forget that I was only going to have 2 or 3? I thought about it before I got out of my car to walk in. Did I forget every time? Well, they're saying that with that happening, that's not a problem with the mind. They're going to say, once you understand this allergy, you're going to understand how this makes perfect sense. Having this allergy is exactly what made us do that. What made us do that is a problem with our body, not our mind. But let's learn a little bit more about that. So as though we work out our solution on the spiritual as well as the altruistic plane, we favor hospitalization for the alcoholic who is very jittery or befogged. So if there's an alcoholic who is very jittery or befogged, needs to be in a hospital. Nowadays, we have treatment centers for that. That is the purpose of a treatment center.
Excuse me, what page, please?
We're on page XXVI, last paragraph. Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. It says here, more often than not, I would underline this, it is imperative that a man's brain be cleared before he is approached. That tells us a couple of things. Number one is if somebody's calling you up and, man, I went out, I drank again, and I'm all drunk, and it's just all worthless, you got to come help me. It is imperative that a man's brain is clear before he is approached. We're going to find later, it goes over that again in the back of the book, that you can't work with somebody who's very drunk, right? We can't work with that. And also notice it says before he is approached, and we're going to see this over and over. Who approaches who? Say the sick guy's approaching us? Well, the person with the solution is the one that's doing the approaching. We'll read that over and over and over. So, imperative that his brain's cleared, as he has then a better chance of, 1, understanding what we have to offer, and 2, accepting what we have to offer. So the doctor writes, here's the second, well, they call it a statement, not a letter. It says, the subject presented in this book seems to me to be of paramount importance to those afflicted with alcoholic addiction. There's that word again, addiction. I say this after many years' experience as medical director of one of the oldest hospitals in the country treating alcohol and drug addiction. There was therefore a sense of real satisfaction when I was asked to contribute a few words on a subject which is covered in such masterly detail in these pages. We doctors have realized for a long time that some form of moral psychology, moral is the ability to tell the right from the wrong, the true from the false, moral psychology, that was of urgent importance to alcoholics. Do you think? Do you think? Well, let's put that into practice. Why would we need moral psychology? Why would we need to be able to differentiate the true from the false? Well, if you got into so much trouble in your drinking that you decided you're going to stop, got every good reason to stop. It's very important. Put your mind to it. Done. Risk versus reward. The reward is not worth the risk anymore. We're done. That's what causes us to quit. Why do we go back? What was the excuse for going back? That made perfect sense. Oh, well, but this time it makes sense. It's worth the reward is worth the risk this time. Has anybody ever relapsed before from doing it, trying to quit, use your willpower to stop, and went back? You ever asked yourself why you did? Ever come? Let me just ask you, if you think about it now, do you have a good reason? Do you have any explanation at all? Do you have any idea? They believe that there's this moral psychology that's very important for alcoholics. Somehow or another, we need to teach them to have the ability to differentiate the true from the false. For me to believe the reward is greater than the risk, I must not be able to differentiate the true from the false here now, should I? Well, you know what? The wife pissed me off, so I'm going out on a bender. Oh, so that is worth the risk of what's going to happen. Is that right? That's worth it. That doesn't make any sense. No. So that's what they're saying we need is this moral psychology, some of the mind. Unfortunately, they say its application presented difficulties beyond our conception. Can't figure out how to get you to remember, hey, you're going to lose everything. Is it worth it? Could you just put that on a piece of paper in your pocket? Is it worth losing everything? And when you get ready to drink, pick that up and read, oh, is it worth it? Well, yeah, because they have not figured out how to get that into our heads. What with our ultra-modern standards, our scientific approach to everything, the doctor says we're perhaps not well equipped to apply the powers of good. It's an interesting term, powers of good, that lie outside of our synthetic knowledge. Sounds like he's saying that they're hopeless to help the hopeless. Many years ago, one of the leading contributors to this book came under our care in this hospital. That's again Bill. And while here, he acquired some ideas. That was the first thing he did, right? But he goes on to say, which he put into practical application at once. Got the ideas. How long did it take him to put it in place? At once. You learn this stuff. We do it when? At once. Later, he requested the privilege of being allowed to tell the story to other patients here. So he was doing the second piece. He was trying to present his conception to other alcoholics. Now, this Bill had been there 3 times. Doctor said, you're hopeless. Bill comes back. He looks different, sounds different, says he's recovered, but it's only been a couple of months. And now he's saying he wants to walk around our ward and start talking to other alcoholics. Says, and with some misgiving, do you think? Do you think they might have had some misgiving about that? But we can send it. See what he can do. These guys are hopeless anyway. The cases we have followed through, and you know they followed through and watched very closely what Bill was doing, right? Cases we followed through have been most interesting. In fact, many of them are amazing. The unselfishness of these men as we have come to know them, the entire absence of profit motive, and their community spirit is indeed inspiring to one who has labored long and wearily in this alcoholic field. They, 1, believe in themselves, one thing he found in these people who are recovered, and 2, they believe still more in the power that pulls chronic alcoholics from the gates of death. That would be the belief in God and dependence on God. Of course, an alcoholic ought to be freed from his physical craving for liquor, and this often requires a definite hospital procedure. Remember, treatment center, separate you from that in which you're addicted. That's what they do. They get you sober. If you want to be sober, go to a treatment center. Chances are you'll be sober the time you're there. Not always, but chances are, because it gets in there too, but chances are that's where you're going to want to go, and their purpose is to separate you. But it says that needs to happen. It often requires a definite hospital procedure before the psychological measures can be of maximum benefit. All right, we've got a couple of minutes. I'm just going to go through, I think, this first paragraph. So the doctor starts here saying, we believe, and this again is the difference between reading and studying, is really paying attention to the words that are being used. And the first word there is we. The doctor isn't saying I believe. He says we. So who's he talking about? Well, where's his position in the pyramid? He's the chief medical director. Him and the people below him. So we believe, and so suggested a few years ago, that the action of alcohol on these chronic alcoholics is a manifestation of an allergy, that the phenomenon of craving is limited to this class and never occurs in the average temperate drinker. So much in that sense. The action of alcohol on these chronic alcoholics. Now we're getting a description, maybe of a type. Remember he talked about a type? What is a chronic alcohol? What is that type? Well, chronic simply means it's two things. One, chronic means that it's something that's repeated over and over and over. So just look in your drinking history. Is that something that you could say, well, when I was drinking, did I do it over and over and over? Okay. Number two is the condition and the manifestations of that condition come on over a period of time. In the medical realm, okay, you have a condition that's either acute or it's chronic. If it's acute, it came on like that. Just got it, just like that right now. Chronic means it's taken over a period of time to get worse and worse and worse. And that's what he's calling a chronic alcoholic. So really nothing out of the realm with my experience with drinking in understanding that word. Chronic alcoholic. So he says, if you're a chronic alcoholic, you're suffering from a manifestation of an allergy. And he says that this allergy, and I want you to think about an allergy. Does anybody in here have any allergies?
Mm-hmm.
You got allergy, Tom?
Mm-hmm.
What are you allergic to?
Food, no. I have a lot of trouble with the. Mine went blank. Different types of food, different materials in food.
And what happens if you have
My nose runs.
Your nose runs. That's a manifestation of the allergy. When the allergen gets into the system, we have an allergic reaction, right? That makes us different than other people because most people don't eat a certain food and have their nose run unless you're allergic. There's some other allergies or manifestations of it. You get the runny eyes, right? Mm-hmm. Sometimes people that are allergic to like fish or bees, right? They get stung by a bee. Some people are allergic so bad that their neck can swell up to the point where it cuts off their airway. Right? So these manifestations are something you can see. You can see when somebody's having an allergic reaction. Someone might have hives, right? Okay. Well, when I drank, I don't know that I could look at that and say, well, I was allergic to it. Number one, if you're allergic to certain foods, do you eat those foods 3-4 times a day?
Try not to.
Try not to.
Not a good idea.
Alcohol was not something I tried not drinking. How could you be allergic to something that you drink so much of? That doesn't make any sense, does it? So we look in this a little more. It says the phenomenon of craving is what happens. That's the manifestation of the allergy. It's not runny eyes, swollen throat, or anything. He says what happens to us is when we put alcohol into our system, if you're an alcoholic of this chronic type, it manifests itself by you having a craving for another one. There's a craving beyond your mental control. A craving for another one. And when we have that other one, since it's beyond our mental control, then we end up having the next one. And then we have a stronger craving for the next. Oh, maybe that's why when I went out to have 2 or 3, I had a lot more than I thought I wanted. That's an explanation that kind of works in my experience that I have no explanation for. That makes sense? That's what he's talking about with the mind. From there, we're going to stop and we will cover that paragraph again next week because there's so much in there. So I thank everybody.
Thank you.
And we're going to